You came back. Good. Pull up a chair and try not to make a sound. This is the last whisper. A teenage boy once survived an entire night in the woods by refusing to answer his own name. Not because he was hiding from a person, not because someone was calling from far away, because whatever stood between the trees had learned the voices of the people around him, and every time it spoke, it sounded a little more human. By sunrise, he and his friend thought they had escaped. By nightfall, the same voice was waiting in the backyard, politely asking to be let in. The neighborhood looked harmless in daylight. It was one of those quiet American suburbs where every lawn was trimmed, every driveway had a basketball hoop, and every house seemed to glow warm and normal when the sun went down. The kind of place where parents told their kids to be home before dark, not because they truly expected danger, but because that was what parents said. That summer, 17-year-old Evan Porter was staying at his house alone for the first time. His parents had driven north for a long anniversary trip. They had left him with a fridge full of food, emergency numbers taped to the kitchen wall, and the kind of trust that made him feel older than he actually was. Evan was not reckless. He cooked basic meals, locked the doors, kept the porch light on, and texted his mother every night before bed. On the third night, the heat had settled over the house like a blanket. Evan was stretched across the couch, half watching an old horror movie he had already seen, when the screen faded into credits. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the soft ticking of the wall clock. He got up, went to the fridge, and drank orange juice straight from the carton because nobody was there to tell him not to. Through the kitchen window, the backyard was a flat rectangle of darkness. He had always hated that window at night. During the day, it looked out over a short lawn, a wooden fence, 2 leaning maple trees, and a small shed that had not been opened in years. At night, the glass turned everything into a question. The fence disappeared. The trees became shapes. The shed looked closer than it should have. Evan clicked off the kitchen light so the glass would stop reflecting his own face. The yard came into view slowly. The grill sat near the patio. The old bird bath was beside the fence. The 2 maples stood in the back corner. And between those trees, something tall was standing completely still. Evan froze with the juice carton in his hand. At first, his brain tried to solve it in a normal way. A rake leaning against the fence, a trash can pulled out by the wind, a jacket caught on a branch. The shape was too thin to be a person, but too upright to be anything else. It had no clear face, no clear arms, just a long, dark body where nothing should have been. He stood there for almost a full minute without breathing properly. Then he remembered the broken patio umbrella his father had shoved behind the shed a few weeks earlier. The thought made him feel ridiculous. He laughed once, quiet and embarrassed, put the juice back and went upstairs. His friend Miles was online. Miles lived a few streets over, close to a wooded walking trail that cut behind the neighborhood. They had grown up together, the kind of friends who could insult each other for an hour and still understand every word as affection. Miles messaged first. He asked if Evan was still alone. Evan said yes. Miles asked if he wanted company. Evan almost said no. He wanted the freedom of the empty house, the TV too loud, the snacks on the counter, the whole summer stretched out in front of him. Then he thought about the thing by the fence. He typed, "Actually, can you come over for a bit?" Miles asked why. Evan typed, "Something weird in the yard, probably nothing." Miles sent back, "That means definitely something." 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Evan opened the door before Miles could press it a second time. Miles stepped inside with a grin, carrying a gas station soda and acting like he had been invited to a party instead of a dark kitchen inspection. They went straight to the window. Evan turned off the light again and pointed toward the back corner. Miles leaned over the sink, squinting. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Miles whispered, "Yeah, that is not an umbrella." The sentence changed the air in the room. Evan felt his stomach tighten. It had been easier to dismiss when he was the only one seeing it. Now Miles was staring at the same shape, and his face had lost all the joking. They decided to check from the patio, but only with the back door open and the kitchen light behind them. Evan unlocked the door. Warm night air pushed into the kitchen. The grass looked silver at the edges where the light touched it. They stepped out together. The shape did not move. Miles took one step farther than Evan, then stopped so sharply Evan almost bumped into him. "Do you hear that?" Miles whispered. Evan listened. At first there was nothing. Then, from somewhere near the back fence came a tiny dry sound. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like fingernails lightly touching wood. Miles backed into the house. Evan looked back at the fence. The space between the two maples was empty. No shape, no umbrella, no person, nothing leaning against the fence, just the dark line of wood and the black, still yard. They locked the door and stood in the kitchen without speaking. That night, Miles slept on Evan's bedroom floor. Neither of them admitted how scared they were, but they kept the hallway light on, and neither one looked out the window again. By morning, the world had made itself normal. Sunlight filled the kitchen. Birds moved along the fence. The backyard looked small, harmless, and almost embarrassing. The boys walked out together and checked every corner. Nothing had fallen into the bushes. Nothing had left marks in the grass. The fence was unbroken. The shed was locked. Miles tried to laugh it off. He said heat did weird things to people. Shadows did weird things. Summer nights made every little sound feel personal. Evan wanted to believe that. So when Miles suggested camping behind his house that night, Evan agreed. It was a dumb idea, and both of them knew it. That was part of the appeal. They were scared, so they tried to turn the fear into a joke. They packed a cheap tent, 2 sleeping bags, flashlights, chips, bottled water, and a battery lantern Miles swore was brighter than a car headlight. Miles's house sat near the last bend of Alder Street. Behind his backyard was a stretch of woods that everyone in town called the Green Belt. It was not huge, but from inside it, the trees packed together tightly enough to hide the houses in less than a minute. They set up the tent just beyond sight of Miles's back porch. It was late afternoon, sticky and bright. Cicadas screamed from the trees. Mosquitoes gathered around their ankles. The boys hammered stakes into the dirt, threw the sleeping bags inside, and dragged a cooler beside the tent. For a while, it felt fun. They explored the trail, found beer cans under a fallen log, argued about which movies were actually scary, and dared each other to walk farther into the trees without looking back. The night before began to feel distant, something that had happened to different people. Near the tent, an old rope hung from a thick branch. Someone had tied it there years earlier, probably as a swing. The lower half was frayed, dirty, and stiff. Evan was lying in the grass with his eyes closed when he heard someone walk past his head. Soft footsteps, grass bending. Then the rope creaked. Evan smiled, thinking Miles had come back from the house and was testing the old swing. "That thing is gonna snap," Evan said without opening his eyes. The rope creaked again, then again, longer that time. Evan opened his eyes. Miles was not there. The rope was moving slightly, but nobody stood beside it. From behind him, near the direction of the house, Miles called, "Dude, found the lantern!" Evan sat up so fast his neck cracked. Miles was walking toward him through the trees, holding the lantern above his head. He was too far away to have touched the rope. He had not been near it. Evan turned back. The rope stopped moving. He did not tell Miles right away. He wanted one more normal minute before the day broke apart. But when Miles reached him, Evan's face gave him away. They tested the rope together. Evan pulled it. Miles pulled it. They yanked hard enough to bend the branch. No creak, not a single sound. Miles looked toward the trees and said, "Maybe someone was messing with us." Evan asked, "Where did they go?" Neither of them had an answer. That evening, they stayed close to the tent. They cooked nothing. They ate chips and chocolate and drank warm soda, while the woods slowly turned black around them. Miles hung the lantern outside the tent at first, and its yellow light made the nearest tree trunks glow like bones. Beyond the circle of light, the woods looked sealed shut. Miles told a story he had heard from his older cousin. It was about something called a caller. Not a ghost exactly, not an animal, something that lived where people got lost. It did not know how to speak at first. It listened from the tree line, learned the sounds people made when they were scared, and repeated them until somebody answered. Evan told him to shut up. Miles laughed, but he zipped the tent closed a little too quickly. They brought the lantern inside and kept it on low. The tent walls glowed pale gold. Every twig snap outside sounded closer than it should have. Eventually, exhaustion did what bravery could not. Both boys fell asleep. Evan woke sometime after midnight with a sour taste in his mouth and the feeling that someone had just whispered directly into his ear. The tent was dimly lit, but the lantern was not inside. At first, his sleepy mind gave him easy explanations. Maybe Miles had moved it. Maybe they had left it outside. Maybe it had rolled behind a backpack. Then he saw Miles's face in the weak glow coming through the fabric. Miles was awake. He was staring at the tent door. "Where's the light?" Evan whispered. Miles answered without turning his head. "Outside." Evan crawled to the zipper and opened the door a few inches. The clearing was empty. The lantern's glow came from above. Evan tilted his head back. The lantern was hanging high in the tree, tied to the upper half of the old rope, swaying gently in air that was not moving. It was at least 20 feet up. There was no ladder, no low branch, no possible way for either of them to have placed it there without waking the other. Miles began breathing hard. Evan closed the zipper. For almost a minute they sat completely still, two teenage boys in a cheap tent, trying to negotiate with a reality that no longer cared about them. Miles said they should wait for morning. Evan said they needed to get back to the house. Waiting felt like giving the woods permission to come closer. They decided to knock the lantern down, grab it, and run straight toward Miles's backyard. They left their bags, the cooler, the tent, everything. Evan went first. Outside, the cold hit him harder than it should have. The day had been hot, but the clearing felt refrigerated, as though the air had been stored underground. Miles came out behind him, whispering every curse he knew. The lantern rocked above them. Evan picked up the frayed lower half of the rope and threw it. He missed. Miles grabbed a backpack and hurled it upward. It clipped the lantern hard enough to knock it loose. The lantern dropped through the branches, hit the dirt, cracked, and kept shining. Evan grabbed it. They ran. At first, they thought they were running toward the house. They were wrong. After a minute, there should have been porch lights, the fence, the shape of Miles's garage. Instead, there were only trees, more trees, and the narrow cone of yellow light bouncing across roots and dirt. Miles stopped first. "This isn't right," he said. Evan turned in a slow circle. Every direction looked the same. The tent was gone. The house was gone. The path was gone. Even the distant hum of the neighborhood had vanished. Then the lantern flickered. Miles slapped the side of it. The light steadied. Evan saw something on the ground a few feet ahead. A sleeping bag, not rolled up, laid flat. Beside it was another one. Then a line of objects leading away through the trees. Evan's water bottle, Miles's hoodie, the bag of chips, the cooler lid, a flashlight with no batteries inside it. Their belongings had been arranged in a careful trail. At the end of the trail stood the tent. Only it was not where they had left it. The door hung open. Something large was crouched inside. It did not lunge. It did not growl. It sat there with a patience that felt planned. The shape was folded low, too tall for the tent, its back pressing against the fabric from the inside. The yellow lantern light showed only pieces of it through the thin material. A bent shoulder, a long, pale angle that might have been an arm, a head held too still. Miles raised the lantern. Evan whispered, "Turn it off." Miles did not move. Evan whispered again, sharper, "Turn it off." From inside the tent, a voice whispered back, "Turn it off." It sounded like Evan. Not perfectly. The rhythm was wrong. The words came out stretched and wet, as though something was pressing them through a mouth it did not understand. Miles made a tiny broken sound in his throat. The thing inside the tent shifted. The fabric scraped across its back. Then it said, in Miles's voice, "Dude?" The lantern clicked off. Darkness swallowed everything. Evan grabbed Miles by the sleeve and pulled. They moved backward one careful step at a time. The woods had gone completely silent. No insects, no wind, no distant cars. Nothing but their breathing, too loud and too fast. From the tent came a soft tapping. Tap, 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 tap. The same sound from Evan's backyard. Fingernails on wood. Only now it was moving across the ground. Miles began shaking. Evan could feel it through his sleeve. The voice came again, closer than the tent. "Dude?" Then Evan's voice. "Turn it off." Then Miles's voice, smaller and frightened. "Please." Evan understood something then. It was not repeating words to communicate. It was testing bait. Every sound they had made in fear had been collected and sharpened into a hook. Miles broke first. He switched on the lantern and bolted. Evan saw only one frame of the thing before he turned and ran after him. White skin, a body unfolded from the ground, arms that bent in too many places, a head that snapped toward the light with the fast, hungry movement of an owl. Then the boys were running through the trees. The tapping exploded behind them. Not footsteps. Too many points hitting the ground. Tap, 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 tap. It moved low, then high, then somewhere above them. Branches shook overhead. Leaves rained down. Evan heard something pass from trunk to trunk with impossible speed, keeping pace just behind the lantern glow. Miles screamed, "Don't look!" Evan did not look. The lantern beam jumped wildly over roots and trunks. The woods bent around them as though every path had been rearranged. Evan's lungs burned. His legs turned heavy. He heard his own name behind him in his mother's voice. "Evan!" He almost stopped. The voice was perfect, warm, worried, close. "Evan, honey, come here." Miles grabbed his wrist and yanked him forward so hard Evan nearly fell. That saved him. The thing crashed down behind them with a sound like wet branches breaking. They ran harder. The lantern slipped from Miles's hand and hit the dirt, spinning light across the trees. For a second, the whole forest strobed yellow and black. In that flash, Evan saw it again. It was not chasing like an animal. It was climbing through the spaces between shadows, unfolding and folding itself around the trees. Its face was smooth in places and wrong in others, as if it had borrowed features from people who had looked at it too long. One eye sat higher than the other. Its mouth was not open, but voices still came from it. "Please, dude, Evan, turn it off." Miles kept running into the dark without the lantern. Evan followed the sound of his feet. The world became impact and breath and pain. Branches cut their arms. Roots grabbed their shoes. Evan slammed shoulder first into a tree, spun, stayed upright, and kept moving because stopping meant becoming another voice in the woods. Then, ahead of them, orange light appeared. A street lamp. Real light. Hard light. Human light. Miles burst out first, stumbling onto a paved walking path that bordered the neighborhood. Evan came after him, almost falling to his knees. Behind them, the woods stopped at a clean black line. The tapping stopped too. For 3 seconds, neither boy moved. Then something passed under the first street lamp at the edge of the trees. It was taller than the lamp pole's lower crossbar. Its body was long and pale and crooked, packed into a shape that did not belong upright. It moved across the light in one smooth motion, then vanished behind the trees again. Miles screamed and ran. They followed the row of street lamps, away from the greenbelt, toward the main road. Evan recognized the turn before Miles did. They were closer to Evan's house than to Miles's somehow. The woods had spit them out on the wrong side of the neighborhood. Evan shouted for Miles to follow him. They cut across a lawn, vaulted a low fence, and landed in Evan's backyard. The kitchen door was locked. Evan's hands shook so badly he dropped the key twice before forcing it into the lock. The moment the door opened, both boys fell inside. Evan locked it, then the deadbolt, then the chain. Then they ran upstairs and locked themselves in the bathroom because it was the only room with no window facing the backyard. They stayed there until noon. Miles cried quietly for most of the night. Evan sat with his back against the bathtub, listening to the house. Once, around 3 in the morning, he thought he heard tapping downstairs. It came once, then stopped. Neither of them spoke. When daylight finally filled the frosted bathroom window, they still waited hours before opening the door. The house was normal. The kitchen door was locked. No muddy footprints crossed the floor. No pale shape crouched in the hallway. Outside, the backyard was bright and ordinary, but neither boy stepped into it. They called Miles's parents. They called Evan's parents. They told enough of the truth to be taken seriously and enough normal lies to avoid sounding insane. They said someone had chased them in the woods. They said there might be a dangerous person hiding near the trail. Police searched the greenbelt that afternoon. They found the tent. It was back in the original clearing. Everything had been packed neatly inside. The sleeping bags were rolled, the cooler was closed, the backpacks were zipped. The broken lantern sat in the center of the tent, clean and dry, even though everyone agreed it had rained lightly before dawn. On the inside wall of the tent, written in dirt, were 2 words: "Turn it off." The police blamed teenagers. The parents blamed panic. The boys did not blame anything out loud. They stopped talking about that night within a week, not because they forgot, but because every retelling made the memory stronger. Evan learned that fear could become a doorway when given enough attention. Miles refused to go near the greenbelt again. For the rest of that summer, both of them slept with lights on. 3 nights after the search, Evan's parents were home, and the house felt safe again. His mother cooked dinner. His father checked the locks. The normal sounds of family life returned. Dishes in the sink, television in the living room, footsteps in the hallway. At 11:40 p.m., Evan woke thirsty. He went downstairs without turning on the hall light. The kitchen was dark. The refrigerator hummed. The backyard window waited above the sink. He poured water from the tap and drank it standing there. Then he heard a soft sound from outside. Tap, 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 tap. Evan did not move. The backyard was black beyond the glass. Slowly the shape appeared between the 2 maple trees, tall, thin, leaning slightly, like it was pretending to be something harmless. Evan backed away from the sink. The shape moved out from between the trees. It crossed the lawn without hurry, tapping lightly against the ground with every step. As it came closer, the kitchen window reflected a pale suggestion of height, joints, and a head tilted in careful listening. Then, from the other side of the glass, his mother's voice whispered, perfect and gentle. "Evan, honey, open the door." Evan ran upstairs and woke his parents. His father searched the yard with a baseball bat and a flashlight. His mother called the police. Officers came again and found nothing. No footprints, no damaged fence, no sign anyone had been there. But in the morning, Evan saw something carved into the outside of the kitchen door. Not deep, not angry, almost careful. 2 words, "Please answer." That is where the story becomes harder to dismiss. Because a prankster can move a lantern, a person can write on a tent, a stalker can hide in the woods. But whatever followed Evan home knew the voices inside his house. It knew which voice could make him stop. It knew which words made people open doors. It had waited at the edge of the yard before the camping trip, and after the woods, it returned with better language. The creature did not chase them because it was hungry in a simple way. It studied them. It learned them. It used fear as a lesson. Evan moved away years later. Miles did too. Neither of them ever went camping again. They do not speak often, but once a year, usually around the hottest part of summer, one of them sends the other the same message. "You still hearing anything?" Most years the answer is no. One year, Miles did not answer for 2 days. When he finally replied, the message was only 3 words. It said, "Please." No one knows what lives in that greenbelt. No one knows why it chose 2 boys who were only trying to scare themselves for fun. The clear fact is that it did not stay in the woods. It stood in a backyard first, waited for attention, followed them into deeper darkness, and came back with the voices it had stolen. The story leaves one question that should bother anyone who has ever heard their name called from another room. When a familiar voice speaks from somewhere it should not be, how many times can a person ignore it before it learns a better way to ask?